We didn't tell you, but it's called the Tipsy Terps tonight.
Right. I have tea.
Jonathan is just drunk on life. Man, I only have water. If I had known, I would have gotten organized.
Always come prepared. Never be unprepared for work.
Cheers!
You guys are already cheering me up. This is good.
Cheers to that.
Cheers to that.
Sarah, now that we have 4...
Now we're 4.
This is like with family, you don't have to pretend anymore.
Depending on the family, but let's not go there.
We should have had you on earlier. You're definitely one of us.
What is happening?
We'll explain later.
I can neither confirm nor deny anything, but
I get you.
that's exactly what I meant. Thank you very much. Yes, of course. I'm into it. I'm interested. I mean, who wouldn't?
Right, guys, professional face.
Who's doing the introduction again? Welcome to a very special episode of Troublesome Terps, the podcast about topics that keep interpreters up at night.
It is our Christmas special, our year in review for 2019, and we have a very special present for all of our listeners.
Not only do we have our usual annual showcase of the Troublesome Terps year, but we have a big announcement to make.
From this show onwards, there will be a 4th Troublesome Terp. And we will no longer be a manel. Yes.
Oh my god, but let me tell you, you've heard her twice on the show already. She was on episode 36 telling us about how interpreting is in fact a woman's world. And you heard her a couple of times during our live episode from Geneva. And I believe also in the intro to another episode. So maybe it's actually 3 or 2.5 ones. Who knows? But it is, in fact, you might have already guessed it, the one and only Sarah Hickey. That worked
Wow,
out
what an
fine.
introduction.
Right? Wow.
Yeah,
Welcome,
thank you guys.
Sarah. Welcome as the 4th Troublesome Terp.
Yeah, I'm honored and super happy to be here and to break up the trio and introduce some more diversity.
Exactly.
It's been a long time coming.
Yes, it's about time, I was going to say.
But break up the trio makes you sound like Yoko Ono to the Beatles.
Yes.
That's a joke
Fair
that
enough,
very few people will get.
Well,
Yeah, just the old folks around here.
not everybody might say it's a bad thing,
Yeah, exactly.
But we all realise, and we've been talking about this for a while, and we all realised that we wanted Troublesome Terp to represent more of interpreting life. And also, as soon as we had Sarah on the show once, she blew us away with how natural and how great she was. And we just decided it was time for a 4th host. So we're looking forward to the reaction from this. We'd love to see what people think of this, our first 4-person episode.
4-host episode, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's it. And we had thought we might look back just a teeny tiny bit, because, we're getting towards the end of the year, and that's where you look back at things, and maybe not just at this one year, but maybe even a bit further back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we are moving in such a new time for the Troublesome Terps with a new co-host, maybe even a new look. Who knows how that's going to shake out, but it's just going to be a new era of the Troublesome Terps. So we thought it was going to be a really great time to take a look back into how we actually got started, and also have Sarah chime in as, up to now, an external person as to how she perceives the podcast went. So I think that's going to be really fun. Hopefully, right, Sarah? Because now you're one of us. So
Don't hold back.
don't hold back.
Okay.
Just let go. Let it rip.
No problem.
Exactly.
That's me, my most natural state. So it's okay.
That's why we love you.
Exactly. And I'm not even sure if we've ever talked about the sort of origin story on the show, I think. I don't know.
We've talked about the origin.
We have.
We
Yes,
have.
we
Okay,
have.
so we don't need to do that again.
Once or 5 times. Yeah.
I'm glad that, the videos of the episodes don't go online, because all you'd have seen would be my feet.
Yeah. I don't think I even have video of the very first episodes, because
We did not have video
We did
back
not.
then. Thank
Yeah.
Jesus.
I've kind of volunteered that one day we're going to do like a kind of clip show, not of us, because we have enough clips of us, but it'd be great to have like an episode where we sew together some of what people say. We've had a couple of clips on before. We haven't had an
AMA.
Ask Us Anything AMA for a while.
We did have an AMA.
Yeah, we haven't had one for a while. So,
we haven't had one for a while. That's true.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to send us any really controversial questions, like is it okay to wear tartan trousers in an interpreting booth, we'd be happy to answer them.
Absolutely.
Also, if you send us a lot of very controversial questions for Sarah, that would be even better.
Yes, I'll take them. Don't hold back.
Yeah, we didn't say we were going to answer them, but we'll take.
I mean, it's 2019. Who answers questions?
Well, we do.
We do because that's why we're controversial.
Exactly,
because we answer questions. There you go.
Yeah, I do feel like that, especially maybe on the conference interpreting side of the overall interpreting market, there's a lot of this, tread lightly happening. I definitely felt this already as a student. Getting so many recommendations of like having to be so careful because it's such a small community and there's so many rules and you don't want to make the wrong impression and say the wrong thing to the wrong person accidentally. And so I feel like this is also it's a big hindrance for entering the market because you're so afraid.
Totally.
Yeah, it's like on tiptoes. But also it can absolutely, I think, prevent progress if we don't talk about it. And you guys are not afraid to talk about it. All the like what maybe other people say you shouldn't say, or topics you shouldn't address, like the big scary one, like one of my favorite topics, remote interpreting or machine interpreting, because I mean you at least got to address them. You don't have to like them, but you should talk about them.
Right.
It's been interesting for me. Some things that were controversial aren't controversial anymore. I don't think mental health is controversial anymore, which is good. And can I just say we need to deal with the interpreter mental health thing because it's going to kill us otherwise.
Definitely.
But yeah, it's interesting to see how. I don't know about you guys, but I was really interested to see how Geneva went.
Which was the live event in October,
the big conference,
2019.
And as well as us doing the town hall, I was fascinated at the reception that we got from the people there. Now, obviously, everyone knows Alexander Drexel anyway, because he's probably one of the most famous interpreters in the world. So
very true.
Kind of roll out the red carpet for him.
Yeah, you can roll your eyes as much as you want to. No, you're not going to cut this up.
But yeah, it was interesting to see how much, I hate to say respectability, how much acceptance we got there. And part of me thought, do we need to dial this up again?
It's
interesting that you said that because I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking, are we too palatable at this point? Because in the beginning it was actually about kind of shaking up the status quo and talking about the things that nobody else was going to talk about and kind of, not causing a ruckus, but causing a ruckus. It was just it was kind of about ruffling some feathers and just talking about the things that nobody else would talk about. And I feel like over time, as we've become more grown up, more respectable, more known, and we've had more respectable, more grown up, more known people on the podcast, I feel like the podcast has taken a different direction than we initially intended on. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's different than it was in the beginning. And I wonder if sometimes it should just be now the four of us, of course, just talking some mess about the interpreting market again. Just about some stuff that really grinds our gears. Just, talk about some stuff.
Can I also say that one of the things that really sold me on Sarah joining us was on the live show, you'll hear Sarah's comment about remote interpreting. And the straight down the line, this is what's happening, this is reality, deal with it approach, I think is one that I want us to keep in the podcast. But we have to remember, and I think we'll come back to this later, and I think all four of us can say something about this, there is a cost to being that level of honest.
Definitely.
There is. So, for example, I've just pulled up the list of episodes on my browser. Episode 2, we looked at stress and burnout, and if I remember rightly, I told what was my first burnout story. I've now had more since then, but anyway, the first story where I felt professional burnout and what that meant. Now I realise that, anyone who hears that now, I've lost any vestige of being perfect ever. Not that I ever wanted it, but for us to deal with stress, burnout, mental health, it takes people telling stories about stress, burnout, and mental health, and there's a cost to that because it can be difficult to tell those stories. But if they don't get told, then no one realizes that everyone's suffering the same anyway.
Nobody tells them.
So yes, paying the price again.
Yeah, but I don't know if it's necessarily about paying the price, but I think there's a real value to being open and I guess raw is one of those words, but I think it's a good word actually, because I remember we had we've talked about this on the show before, is that we have these bar camps in Germany that we organize for the community to learn and to exchange and to just get together and talk about stuff. And
which will also be in Brussels soon.
Yes, very soon indeed. And I have this very vivid memory of one of the bar camps where one of the sort of more experienced colleagues was really sharing a lot about her episodes of burnout and how she sort of worked through all that and how she copes with it now. And I remember just also looking at the faces of the younger interpreters, just listening to this story. And this has been impressing me a lot over the years. It's been a while now, but still think about that. And I think there was a real value to that. And I don't think it's been negative for her. I mean, it was small, it was not a big audience necessarily, but
right. No, but the news travels fast amongst interpreters, especially, and I think.
Oh gosh, yeah.
I think it was just a very honest moment, and I don't think as freelancers, it doesn't even matter if we're interpreters or not. I think as freelancers, oftentimes you don't feel like you're entitled to your own honest moments of weakness because you always have to be perfect. You've always got to wear that perfect armor of invincibility, even if I was actually just talking to two colleagues of mine today at another job, and it's, now the wintertime, everybody's getting sick, everybody has the flu, but as a freelancer, you kind of still schlep yourself to work. You put in like 5 NyQuils, you put in like 2 Advils, you put in like another ibuprofen on the job, and you're like, okay, I've got to do this one last job, and then it's the weekend, and then I can get sick. I can't get sick right now. I can't get sick. I can't be sick right now. Yeah. I have this one other job because you don't want to lose the money. You don't want to disappoint your booth mate. You don't want to put on the stress on the organizing interpreter or the client or whoever. Like, you don't want to do any of that because you're going to be a huge inconvenience to everybody else, or so you feel.
Yeah.
But we're all just human. And I think just talking about these human experiences, whether it's that colleague at the bar camp talking about the burnout, or you, Jonathan, sharing your experiences, I think it's just very important to sometimes take a step back and remember that we're all just humans. We might be pretending to be superhuman at any given time in our jobs, and we might be superhumans at a particular time in our jobs, but we're just humans for the most of the part of the day. Yeah, most of the times. So I think it's just very important to just remember that, especially at this time of the year when everybody's kind of depressed and the sun is gone and it's cold and gross.
And I think also from the point of view of someone like Sarah, I mean, I remember, and I still have this now, that, there's almost this feeling that if you ever leave freelancing, you must be letting someone down. And it's like, no, if you leave freelancing, it's because you've got another job or you're doing another thing. It's not a big problem. And I think if we can work on our episodes at making sure that everything's completely guilt-free and that, it's absolutely okay to train as an interpreter and then become whatever. That's not the issue. The issue is creating a profession and creating an environment where everyone realizes that, at the conference in Geneva, you had researchers, you had trainers, you had interpreters, you had a neurologist, and we're all people who are excited about interpreting. Well, that'll do. Sarah, did you feel as like someone who is a trained interpreter but an interpreting researcher, did you feel completely at home in that room, or?
No.
Did anyone?
Not at all.
Really? Because I know when I've done more research than interpreting, I kind of have to say to myself, I am still an interpreter. It's okay, I'm still an interpreter.
You belong.
Well, no, I didn't feel excluded in that sense at all. Yeah, so first of all, I did really enjoy the conference, but for me it was very different. So I've been to a bunch of conferences recently for NIMSY for the other side of the industry and for research and more on the business side, where there's generally a really friendly atmosphere in the room. Everyone's chatting with everyone, and it's about innovation. Of course, people are also trying to sell, but there's a lot of interesting conversations, and I don't feel like there's as much. People don't hold back as much. That might just be my impression, but. So in Geneva, then, well, it also turned out to be a really great conference, and I met tons of super nice people. And I am an interpreter, and I, didn't feel out of place in that sense. I felt like it was all a little bit more distant and higher up or something. Like there was a little bit more of a barrier, and also in terms of what was maybe being talked about or not talked about. And that's why I at some point just went, okay, well, I got to say something, as in, I don't know. I sometimes have this tendency to go, f it, and I'm just going to do it. And either people will like me or they won't. But, as long, like I don't, I'm not trying to upset anyone on purpose, but I also think that some things just need to be said, because it doesn't, just because you don't talk about it doesn't mean it's not there, so it's just better to address it.
And look at where that got you.
Yeah.
So this is great.
I'm on top of the world right now.
Well, I think that's the thing, is if we can keep this as the Just Say It podcast, there is another question that we put is, do we have a responsibility to be less troublesome? And I think actually our responsibility is to be one place. Yeah, I think
Right.
I think we have to keep being the one place where people can just say it.
Yes.
And the great thing is, Alex Gansmeyer and I are consultant interpreters, so if people don't like us, it's fine. We don't have to work with them. It's not a huge deal. Alex Drexel works for the commission, so hey ho, so long as he doesn't upset Florica, he's fine. And Sarah works for NIMSY, so I'd imagine your bosses want you to be troublesome, given some of the stuff you're writing.
Gosh, we had them on the show the other day.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
So yeah, I think maybe our responsibility is to be the Just Say It podcast and not get sued by Nike.
I think that's a pretty good motto.
Yeah. Was this sort of the first big interpreting conference for you, Sarah?
Well, yeah, it all depends on how you look at it, I guess. So for NIMSY, I went to Gala and I went to Lockworld, and I'm going to NTIF now in a week. But for me, like there's almost, when I look at interpreting now, there's like two sides for it for me. Like they're interlinked, but like, I come from the academic side with the masters, and and then there's the institutions. So I feel like there's this whole side of the institutions and AIC and the academics, and that is, in that sense, that was the first conference that I went to properly on that side. And then there's the other side that is more the business, the private sector, where we, like, for example, Gala, I mean, it encompasses a lot, but for me, I would classify more in that direction, even though it had a really, really good interpreting track, for example. It has a completely different vibe to it. And also the discussions are completely different. It feels like two different worlds sometimes.
That really concerns me. I mean, the academic world is, in a sense, can be its own little bubble if people aren't careful. I'm used to the academic world being quite tied to, if not the business world, then at least the kind of government central purchasing world. And I thought when I was in Geneva, I thought it was interesting because it felt to me it was a very kind of, in some ways it was a very high level conference, but I think all of the four of us agreed there were things there that weren't being discussed, or were being discussed in a very interesting way that would have been discussed differently anywhere else. Certainly even at like the other professional translation and interpreting conferences that I've been to. I don't know about Falcade, but certainly ITI and some of the others are more openly, this is business, deal with it, in a lot of senses. And there's more of a connection to the business side of, you have to have a fantastic quality product, you have to market it properly. Yeah, certainly in the interpreting tracks.
Well, I think it doesn't, for me, I think it doesn't all. There's something to be said about, in the end, the market decides, right? Not really us, but also protecting our own working conditions, for example, and, quality standards, and finding that kind of a, level, which that often interlinks anyway. But I think it's more important to allow for thought-provoking discussions in whatever way. And I actually spoke too soon there earlier, and I was at another conference from more the academic other side of the industry for me, not just in Geneva. I was at Discuss Interpreting last year.
Paris, yeah.
Paris.
True.
Yeah, at the ESET campus. And that, for example, I mean, okay, I was also presenting there, so I'm not trying to say that was amazing because I was presenting. But it was overall, I thought the atmosphere at that conference was really nice and a lot more thought-provoking, I thought.
I had a message from someone during the Geneva conference who was following the tweet saying, "Are we just discussing things that people should know anyway?" I don't think that was fully the truth, and I have to say outright, I loved the Geneva conference. It was an absolute honour to meet so many great interpreters and meet so many people. But I think because we had a lot of people who were very aware of their responsibilities, the discussion was very different than if you're in a room of people who basically are only responsible for themselves.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think it was just the you can just say it conference.
No. And to an extent, on the one hand, that's good training. We need to be in. So I was recently at an export forum, and I realised that I had to be careful with what I said there. And actually, you need to just say atmosphere, but we also need to train ourselves that, if you're going to an export forum, you don't need to be telling people the ins and outs of, recent debates and interpreting. They don't need to know that. And if someone asks you a question that relates to a recent debate, you need to shut your mouth and give them the answer that's relevant to them. But that takes training, and I've only just gotten good at it in the past year or so, because I'm naturally someone who likes to talk and who likes to tell long stories. I don't know if anyone's noticed that.
Really?
Who knew that?
I'm kidding.
Yeah.
So but it's interesting. Apparently, there's still a bit of a need to debrief the Geneva conference. But I mean, that was only one of the episodes that we did this year. So maybe let's move on to some of the others as well. The very first one in 2019 was actually the 2018 in review.
I remember us getting to January and going, wow, we did a lot. And then this year I'm looking at it going, if I think we did a lot in 2018, 2019 has been crazy.
I mean, the good thing about 2019, I think that actually took a lot of our plates was that we didn't have to plan the live event ourselves. I think the fact that we put on our own live event in 2018 was still a monumental task.
Yes.
And the fact that people still bought tickets for that boggles my mind to this very day. So thank you very much still to this day, whoever bought any ticket. This year,
you know who you are.
We didn't put, you know who you are, so it's your fault. We're still on the air. So thanks to that.
If you would like another one, let us know. hello@troubleterps.com.
Yeah, we definitely got to do this again.
Who knows? We might already be planning something. Nobody can say. But anyways, I'm sure you'll be the first to hear about this, to listen
Definitely.
to our announcements. Anyways, so episode 32 was our 2018 in review, so I don't think there's much more to say that was what we did in 2018.
Yeah, exactly.
If you want to find out more about that, you can listen to all of the 2018 episodes on our website, troubleterps.com.
Exactly. So there's just a subtle
which you should do
there.
anyways.
Yeah, exactly. The next one, though, was a lot of fun with Corinne and Eve. And I mean, for all of you who know Corinne McKay and Eve Boudreau from the ATA, they're a troublesome duo, I was going to say. They were definitely a lot of fun to hang out with and discuss things. I remember there being a very joyful and jolly mood in the virtual room that we had together. That was a fun one.
I mean, that was great fun to have, and it was another podcast collab. That seems to have been a theme this year as well.
We did two of those.
I've been really pleased at how many other podcasters we've done collabs with. And I think it says something about our industry. We can all talk what's bad about translation and interpreting, but it says something about our industry that there's such a collegial atmosphere that it doesn't matter whether you're the president of ATA with a podcast that I don't know how many people listen to, or you're interpreters with a podcast with a remit to try and just say it. We can all work together and record stuff together. That was really encouraging about the industry or sector.
And the interesting thing to me was also that there are now so many different podcasts about translation and interpreting, which was different, I think, when we started, because that was one of the reasons why we did it in the first place, is that we thought, well, there's a couple of things, but there's not really something that there's something missing, I guess, is what I'm trying to see. So we just thought, well, we'll give it a try and see if we can fill that gap.
I think the big one was the ATA podcast, wasn't that it? That was kind of the biggest one that was out there at the time.
I think so, yeah. And there was marketing tips for translators already, Teswiti.
Right.
But there wasn't really anything specific to interpreting, at least as far as I can remember.
Mm.
And now there's you have Cerveza Escucha, you have, I'm sure there are others as well.
Yeah, there's quite a few now. Yeah.
And I need to find some more. Send us your list of other interpreting podcasts to listen to. That'd be fantastic. But from what I can tell, each podcast has got its own focus and its own flavour. And it's amazing how you can get podcasts with quite a kind of narrow focus that are really getting more and more episodes together. Mm-hmm. I'm really pleased to see the diversity of the industry, and I don't think that just because there are loads of interpreting podcasts now that it's time for us to retire.
No, I think because everybody brings like a different perspective to the table, which is interesting. Yeah. And then the next one we did we called it the Crystal Ball of Interpreting, which was kind of a funny episode because it was improvised. We didn't do a lot of prep for that one. We just sort of got together and thought we'll talk about this, and
brought some beer.
I don't know if there was any beer involved. May have been wine or cider. I don't know.
It might have been, yeah, some sparkly stuff. Who knows?
But that turned out to be a fun one, and apparently it struck a chord. So a lot of people were listening to that one.
But then episode 35, we showed that we have our business hat on.
Yes.
And we had Florian from Slater.com, and that to me sounds like it's almost like the first in a run of episodes that we had. Was it this year? Yeah, because we're Globally Speaking Later, where we were really getting into what Sarah calls what did you call it, the commercial or the business side.
Yeah, I think.
And that's an area that I think we should explore further, because there's a lot to be said for hearing from those kind of people. And Florian's view is just, he's got the bird's eye view of bird's eye views, I think, apart from Nimsy, of course.
No, but it was interesting also to hear about the backstory of Slater, which I didn't know about. So that was interesting to hear as well. So if you haven't listened to that one, go back and do check it out. And that brings us neatly actually to episode 36, which we've mentioned in the introduction, which was the one about interpreting being
who was that
a
with?
Woman's world. I don't know. I think it was...
I don't know.
Something with S, I think. Rhymes with Hera.
Oh, Sabine.
No.
I think it was
Simone.
Was it not with some Irish lady?
I guess.
Yeah, it was definitely with some Irish lady. Yes. Yeah. Who's that Irish lady?
It's funny though, because I mean,
that gets confused a lot.
I think we mentioned that in the episode, Sarah. There's kind of a funny sort of it's a small world story behind this, because Rachel Ryan, who also studied at Galway, NUI Galway, she wrote her master's thesis about sort of the gender aspects of interpreting, which then got picked up by Camille and by you, and then funnily enough, Rachel was well, you can tell the story better than I, so go.
Yeah, so Rachel, she did the master's in Galway, wrote her thesis on men's motivations to become interpreters in a very feminized field now, and what their views are on the gender imbalance. And then she went on to become the interpreting researcher at NIMSY. And then I started studying at the same university a few years later and saw her thesis and thought it was awesome. And I wanted to do the female perspective, which I did. And then, through talking to Rachel, I ended up becoming the next interpreting researcher at NIMSY. So it went full circle.
Absolutely. That's about as full circle as it gets. Even in a comparatively small world like interpreting. So that's kind of a fun story to that. Yeah.
To have another researcher on the program always makes me feel nicer and makes me feel normal.
Well, I'm glad.
you feel heard and understood.
In the end, we're all just nerds here, so.
That's true.
In different
Actually,
ways.
it's a true, in our own crazy ways. But it's a good segue to episode 37, which was also with a researcher from Austria in that case, which was Dr. Karin Reithofer, who's a good colleague and friend of mine. So I thought that was an interesting episode as well. And I think that's this was about English as a lingua franca, which is a topic that's almost essential to interpreters, and it might be a topic that we're going to revisit sometime soon. I don't know what you think about this.
Well, the knock-on from that is I have since cited her twice in things that I've written, one of which I'll talk about later. But yeah, she opened my eyes to an area of research that I wasn't even aware of. I felt it was really good for calming down any residual worries that people might have about us being turfed out of our job. Interpreters never retire, they just stay muted.
Okay. Moving right along. The next episode was a bit special.
That was your big moment, Alex. Let's just be honest. That was your big.
Very close to home.
It did. Hit very hard.
It was a fun episode to do though, because you got to grill me and ask me all kinds of nasty questions.
It was the one episode when we were just grilling you about any and everything that we wanted to know about working for the institutions. Is this true? Is that true? Do you guys have a gilded, suede-cladded break room where people just come and massage your feet and bring you lukewarm Evian water?
Basically like business class.
It turns out, everybody, this is exactly how it is. It turns out that you really... Basically, once you've made it to the European Union, it's just like first class on an airplane. That's pretty much the life.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it. You might as well just give up.
Well, I remember two things about that episode. One, I remember all the checks that had to be run to make sure it was okay. And I also remember...
Oh, yeah, there were lots of loops. Lots of feedback loops. I don't actually know if we're allowed to say this.
No, I have to kill you now.
All right, fair enough. I mean, we've done a lot, so this is where we say
as
goodbye
good
now.
as it gets.
I mean, you now have you now have Sarah. So
yeah, she's actually going to do the show just on her own from here on out.
It's fine. Just on her own. I love it.
So long.
We're going to be replaced by androids.
I was actually very briefly for 1 year a student ambassador for DG Link.
Oh, I had no idea. Tell us. DG Link is the European Parliament.
Oh, so you're part of the mob. Okay, so we have to take it down. We have to take you
totally
down with us then.
That's right.
Alex, I don't think our retirement plan works.
Let me explain for people who are listening at home.
We are all crazy.
No, but the other thing that I remember from that episode, now we're on bits that won't get cut out of the final recording, is that when I was doing my masters, I had this impression that institutional interpreters all were kind of looked after by people dressed as maids, bringing them coffee and water and stuff, and the notes would come on like kind of silk pillows and stuff. It was rewarding for me, and I'm going to phrase this carefully, it was rewarding for me to realise that the interpreters at the institutions, yes, they do have perks that freelancers don't have, but at the end of the day, they're still working their rear ends off like we do. And that was really reassuring, because the impression you get whenever you listen to the recordings is they're just kind of gliding and nothing phases them, and that they're all perfectly prepped and they've got all everything laid out for them.
Which recordings are these?
No. Well, when you hear like the live recordings from the European Parliament, everything sounds so perfect. What was the conference? There was the Translating Europe forum, and all of the feedback that I saw on Twitter from Translating Europe was,
that was so lovely.
How amazing are the translators going, wow, interpreting is hard. And I was like, guys, if you think that's hard...
No. Can I just say the appreciation was mutual if anybody is listening. It's definitely mutual.
Moving on before Alex goes redder.
Moving straight along, actually is still staying in Brussels.
I was going to say that the best way to become a good interpreter is good interpreter training, and that's what the next episode was.
Nice.
See what I did there?
Very nice. Very
Lovely
nice.
transition.
We compete for who can have the best segues.
Yeah, I was going to stick with Brussels. But
exactly.
You take the lead, Alex. It's good.
Yeah. Because this episode was recorded in Brussels. That's what
it was indeed.
Partially.
Yes.
Mostly.
Not that you were there for the recording, Alex.
Because I have no idea what happened to it.
So what happened was I showed my dedication to the podcast by recording an episode while I was on holiday.
You were?
I was on holiday. I was in my mum's kitchen.
I was going to say you were still sitting in a kitchen. It wasn't your kitchen for a change.
It was my mum's kitchen. No, but I felt so to kind of give you the picture, Sarah and Alex, so you've got me sitting in my mum's kitchen, probably with a cup of tea next to me, and the other side of the screen were Andy Gillies and Alex D. And if anything is ever going to seem like the world's scariest job interview, that's going to be it.
Yeah, because we were sitting next to each other, sort of like interviewing Jonathan, and
and I was
looking scary.
But then look at who was really getting interviewed. So I think you guys were just lulling Andrew, into a very, I don't know, good atmosphere for the interview. Let's just say
in a way we did, yeah.
Too. Yeah.
It was a great fun episode. I think Andy said things that I don't think we've heard on the podcast before. I found it challenging in places.
I loved his comment about the imposter syndrome when he said how he was really suffering from imposter syndrome. And I said, well, don't we all? It's kind of a thing in interpreting circles. And he said, no, but it's not imposter syndrome if it's true. That's what he said.
I take issue with that.
Yeah, me too. Well, but that's what he said.
And I wrote that in the comments for the episode. I know nobody saw this, but maybe actually we can do like a whole episode on imposter syndrome because I don't understand the whole concept of it. Like I don't understand any of that. Let me rephrase. I didn't understand anything about the imposter syndrome until we went to Geneva and until we had the live event, because that's when I basically had a mental breakdown, and then Alex and Jonathan had to pull me back up, and I was like, what am I doing here? Why does anybody listen to me? And they were like, look, see, this is the imposter syndrome. And I was
that was your first-hand experience.
This is my first-hand experience.
There are two syndromes that we have to cover in the same episode. One is imposter syndrome, and I think a lot of interpreters, maybe apart from Alex Gansmeyer, suffer from imposter syndrome.
Right.
The other
Am
one,
I the only
which
one?
I have,
let us know. hello@troubleterps.com.
The other one, which I have seen equally and is actually more dangerous, and yes, I did write about this in my upcoming book due out December 22nd from all good bookstores.
Wait, you're writing a book?
I have written a book, Stuart.
Wait,
we'll talk
you
about
can
that
write?
We'll talk. Yes, I can write. Scottish people learn to write at school. So the opposite syndrome, and I couldn't find the word for this when I was writing my book, but I found it now, is called Dunning-Kruger syndrome. Yeah. And it's when people think they are more skilled at something than they actually are. And
like Donald Trump.
Oh yeah,
Boris Johnson. Nigel Farage. Who knows? I mean, I don't.
I've someone
never heard say this. Who said this?
This is the sound of me cutting tape.
So we've got the Just Say It podcast, and then Alex doing the Just Edit It.
Exactly.
Yes, the Just Edit section of
that's
Just
the part
Say It
I really enjoy.
That's the pod. No, you were saying that's the pod I really enjoy.
Oh,
let Jonathan speak. Come on.
I was handing over to Sarah to talk about Dunning-Kruger. I've only ever... Have I worked with interpreters with Dunning-Kruger? I've worked with interpreters... I've had a couple of times where I felt an interpreter was doing not as well as they thought they were doing, but they were still doing from the client's point of view, they were still doing an okay job. But Sarah, you were about to say something about Dunning-Kruger.
No, I wasn't. I was, if anything, going to
talk
about imposter syndrome. Exactly. I have never personally experienced the other syndrome, but just imposter syndrome, definitely.
Yeah, can anybody just kind of define the Dunning-Kruger syndrome for me? For those, for not for me, but like for those who don't know.
Those of you who don't know.
Yeah, those of you who don't know.
You're just playing the advocate.
All right, so if you imagine that you've got a graph, and at either end of the graph you've got people who are rubbish at something and people who are actually really good. What happens is the people who are rubbish at something tend to overestimate their ability. The people who are good but not great tend to get imposter syndrome, and the end of the graph is people who are great and actually begin to realize, yeah, I know what I'm doing. The problem with Dunning-Kruger is that the people who are worst at something often don't realize they're the worst at it, and so you get things like clients saying, oh, it's okay, we've got someone in-house who can translate, or we've got someone in-house who can interpret, who thinks they're fantastic but who messes up badly. Or you get researchers thinking, yeah, I don't need to read research methods books, I know what I'm doing, and they write studies which are no good to anyone. So imposter syndrome is actually, Dunning-Kruger syndrome is wider than people think, and imposter syndrome is right in the middle where you're actually good at something, but you don't think you're really good at it. And it's fine. If you're excellent and you know you're excellent, that's fine. It's when you're really bad and you think you have abilities that you don't have that is dangerous. And I wonder if what Andy was getting at is that sometimes you are an imposter and you should admit that and you should work to deal with that, because everyone can get better. And maybe there's a sense in which at times in interpreting, I know certainly I was super confident when I got my master's and I thought I knew everything. And you suddenly realise when you start doing jobs, you think, oh, I actually need to work on X, Y, and Z. And it's why I get really scared when interpreters say things like, if you weren't good, you wouldn't be here. Because that's not necessarily true, because it would be possible in certain environments to fake your way into jobs.
So I actually like that definition a lot more than the imposter syndrome. I think that's a lot more realistic. Because I, in fact, have a lot of colleagues who think, they know for a fact they're good interpreters because otherwise they wouldn't be here. See what I did there? And, but they don't think, they're sitting there and they're thinking, I didn't really do a good job today. Like, this isn't really what I'm doing. And I think that's kind of what that, I forgot the name already, but what the other syndrome was doing, the Dunning-Kruger syndrome is kind of doing. And I think that's kind of that, which I can relate much more to my life and my experience than the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't know.
So Dunning-Kruger syndrome is classically only used to talk about the left-hand side of the graph where people are garbage and they don't know.
Well, then that's not it.
But if you look at if you look at any definitions of it in books, it will usually give you the full graph and say, you've got classic Dunning-Kruger on one side, imposter syndrome in the middle, and then actual people who've dealt with it on the other. And I remember hearing and talking to Elisabeth Tiselius, who's probably the expert on what expertise looks like in interpreting, and her definition of what it takes to, if you like, get to the right hand of the graph, be excellent and know you're excellent, is really interesting, because it really says that all interpreters are getting towards excellent. Very few of us have probably made it to being absolute expert interpreters, apart from maybe the odd staffer.
Or freelancer.
That says something. The problem with freelancers is that to build up expertise, you have to have a certain amount of deliberate practice on top of your focused work. And that's difficult to get to.
I don't know how many staffers have deliberate practice on top of their focused work.
Well, that's a whole other question.
Exactly. So I think it might just apply to freelancers as much as it applies to staffers. So that's a whole other episode. Email us at hello@troubletips.com if you want to hear more about that. Like and subscribe.
I was going to say it would be interesting to know about the habits of interpreters, like how often do you practice, and what should deliberate practice cover. But that is a whole other episode. Maybe we should get Elisabeth on one episode and talk about expertise.
We definitely have to get her on at some point.
We definitely have to get her on. Yeah.
But essentially, imposter syndrome is just that you're afraid that more or less every minute at some point people will find out that you're just a fraud, that you don't belong.
Yeah, you'll get found out. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure, I still, even though I have a PhD, when it comes to research, I still suffer from that at times, especially Geneva. When I was doing the presentation, I was waiting for someone to put their hand up and say, but what about? And I'm not sure if anyone else kind of came across that, waiting for someone to go, but you've missed such and such.
So what?
No, completely. That's why Geneva for me was a minefield. That's why I think I really had the first feeling of interpreter syndrome, imposter syndrome.
Interpreter syndrome. Could we rename it?
Maybe we could just rename it. In Geneva, but I just really felt like completely out of my depths there, and that's a thing that for interpreting I've never felt, because usually you're the only person in the room who knows what you're doing anyways. But then if you're in a room full of interpreters...
That's a controversial
and then you're in a room... Is it though? Isn't it just like a fact of nature?
We may have to revisit that.
I'm very happy to elaborate on this for 45 minutes, but I'm pretty sure that's just a fact of nature. But, we were in the room with a ton of other people who knew exactly what we were doing because they were doing the same thing, and then we were being interpreted on this at the same time, and then we're being recorded, and then we have to ask semi-smart questions, and then it's getting recorded not only for the university and the interpreters, but also for the podcast. And then I was just having a basic mental meltdown. Thanks to the other two, actually, thanks to all three of you guys, I made it through there. Folks, to all three of you folks, not even guys.
We need to. I think we need to come back to the Geneva episode later because there are some things that I think made that work that we haven't always acknowledged. But that was a later episode because the one after the one where I was on holiday, I wasn't there.
That's true.
And this is explaining why we need 4 hosts, ladies and gentlemen.
Moving from one Andrew to the next.
Yeah,
it's true. So many Andrews.
Because if the can I just say consecutive interpreting scares the Rosanna out of me? Or Rosanna if you're French. It does scare the Rosanna out of me. I should probably pronounce that in French. To have an entire podcast episode where you talked about my least favourite interpreting mode, which is consecutive notes, I was glad I wasn't there because I would have known nothing.
But we had a bit of a field day, didn't we, Alex? Because
we loved it. It was the best episode.
All three of us are really are really enjoying consecutive interpreting, although we are sometimes really afraid of consecutive interpreting.
Yeah.
And then we got to talk about technology as well, which was kind of the best of both
it was
worlds.
Kind of a triple win. Yeah, it was just kind of great. I mean, honestly, like I know nobody who likes interpreting. I know one person who likes interpreting, and she can even say why she likes it. I think it's always the same thing. I think it always comes back to the fact that you...
Consecutive, yeah.
I was going to say...
I think we all love interpreting.
Yeah. What are we talking about?
Yeah.
What are we... Who likes interpreting? Just cancel this whole thing.
Sarah, can I just say thank you for jumping in because I was about to and I thought, no, better let someone else do that.
It's appreciated. We knew why we got you on board,
Exactly.
It's good. No, but
just correct us.
So Sarah, since you're new on board and since you interrupted me so rudely and corrected me even,
I know.
Do you like consecutive interpreting?
No, I don't. I mean, I can do it, and I don't mind the whole thing with working with my, relying more on my memory and standing up and talking in front of a crowd. But I hate note taking. That's my thing.
That's tricky.
That's why I don't like it.
So do you do it on a...
I can do it, but I don't enjoy it. It's, no.
So do you do it on a notepad or do you do it on like your phone or like anything cool?
No, because
like an uncool notepad.
That's just I'm a classic paper person. First of all, I'm just more comfortable that way, and also when I was a student, I was very, very poor, so I couldn't afford anything.
Oh yeah, totally. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just say that I have 2 symbols down for my consecutive note taking when I need to write something to do with country or nation? I draw a rectangle.
Oh, I was going to say, is it a square by any chance?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Me too.
Yep.
The other symbol that I have in my consecutive notes, which is down pat, is I get my pen, I drag it down the paper until it rips, and that's my symbol for help me, I'm scared.
Yeah. But does anybody ever pick up on that? That's the question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
No, I've never done it in public because I've just screamed internally. The one time I had to do it on a job, I was just like...
The thing is, internally, no one hears you scream.
Right. I think that's the point, though.
Well, trust me, on that job, they looked at my face and they went, would you rather do this in smaller chunks? And I went, yes. But
love it.
To be fair, it was at a nuclear power plant. And yes, that's all we need to say.
Oh yeah, so we just had like a thing today at the conference about Chernobyl and how it's still how like you still have some effects of Chernobyl. So I'm very glad that you might have done smaller chunks. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But get the message across at a nuclear power plant because it's quite important for like the next 50 to 90 years in the future. Yeah. Who knows?
Here's how my day started. My day started with a welcome from the guys at the plant, and then they said, and before we do anything else, we have to go through the safety information. Please listen carefully, because we'll be telling you exactly what you have to do in the so many different kinds of emergency that could take place. That's when I realised we're going to be doing this sentence by sentence.
Better safe than sorry.
Definitely safety first in a nuclear power plant.
It's like, how many colours of alert do you need? It's when they go through the colours of alert and I'm like, oh no, I didn't bring felt tips.
Yeah. Oh god. All right, let's talk about the last episode before this year in review episode real quick, and then we can move on to the more forward-looking stuff, which is going to be...
We've got two left. We've got
Actually, no.
Geneva and Globally Speaking.
Well, we talked about Geneva quite a bit, so maybe let's skip that. But we did another collab this year, which was a lot of fun with Renato and Michael. And Renato, funnily enough, being Sarah's boss at Nimsy. So
Yeah,
So did you listen, Sarah?
of course I listened.
kind of again the circle of life, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, exactly.
Also,
Comes
Sarah
full
was
circle
on the
once again.
episode a little bit.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
actually heard my name being dropped by Renato there, which was very nice.
Exactly.
And yeah, you guys talked naturally about a few things that I was involved in at Nimsy, given that I'm...
Yeah, I think what happened was that he was recording the show with us and then sort of having dinner with you later, something like that. Or before, I don't know.
The
Yeah,
dinner was
before,
I don't
we were
remember.
we were
Oh,
in
yeah,
Milan.
yeah.
We had a client meeting in Milan, and a few of the team were there. And then he went to record with you guys. So yeah,
That's
it's
it,
all
yeah.
connected.
Everything
So
is
what was the
connected.
better part of the evening, huh? You can tell us, because you're now part of the family. You are free to speak.
Do you want to
openly.
know
Nobody's listening.
if he preferred hanging out with you guys or with me? Is that the question?
No, what you preferred, hanging out with us or hanging out with him?
Oh, okay.
I think
No,
that's the question.
I can't answer that question.
No, she couldn't possibly comment on
Off
this.
the
I couldn't possibly
Off the
decide
record.
because I love hanging out with you guys and I love hanging out with Renato.
Oh, we love you too.
So
Yeah.
what I was going to say though is the episode with Renato and the episode with Florian to me is like part of a series that we should keep going. You know, like on YouTube, like YouTubers have their playlists of similar videos. Like, you know, there are several really good playlists on the Inside Interpreting YouTube channel. I'm going to be building a new one soon.
Like and
But you know,
subscribe.
if we were making a playlist of, you know, business oriented Troublesome Terps episodes, I think that the Renato episode and the Florian episode really go well together because they're people in similar businesses telling us similar things that we need to hear. And maybe that is kind of troublesome for some interpreters to say things like, you know, big businesses aren't necessarily your enemy. They're just trying to make money like you are.
Mhm.
I think from Renato and both Florian, well, more from Renato, we seem to hear about the fragmentation of the interpreting sector and how there are so many different segments and how the companies that go big tend to go big by kind of getting these big government contracts, but that, you know, that's not the market. And I think,
Right.
you know, by understanding that, I know historically interpreters have been anti-big business, but actually if we see this as they're just trying to make money and we don't have to adopt their practices if we don't want to, then that kind of creates more, we become more magnanimous and more accepting. And we can still demonstrate and disagree if we want, but at least we can understand where those decisions are coming from.
Well, I've actually, so for the project that I'm presenting next week in Sweden, I've interviewed people in like 12 different countries. I've assessed the interpreting markets in 12 different countries now. And I mostly spoke to either people from interpreting associations who also have their own company, like there are language service providers for interpreting, or just language service providers. And lots of them were interpreters themselves. And what I found really interesting was that most of them were genuinely concerned about, you know, when there's price pressure from the government side, budgets being cut again, stuff like that, that they're trying to not transfer that onto the interpreters, but to see where else they can cut costs in, you know, in other aspects of their business. And that lots of them were actually trying to, you know, fight for interpreters to be paid better, which surprised me. But also that being, so I feel like, yeah, there's sometimes, I'm not saying that, you know, there's definitely also businesses who don't care as much about interpreters. But something I think to keep in mind is that a lot of those businesses were founded by interpreters as well, who do genuinely know the market and the requirements and who care, and who are sometimes just caught in the middle. But the other thing to remember too, I think, is that it'll never be, well, maybe it's a bold statement, but it'll never be the case that, you know, the interpreting market will just be occupied by big businesses. You know, so you don't have to necessarily work
Fingers
for
crossed.
I mean, I think as an interpreter you can always have that choice still, whether you want to strike out on your own or go with really small providers or agencies, or if you want to join someone big, it's up to you really. The interpreting market is so crazy diverse. If
point,
anything,
yeah.
it's very, very chaotic, and there's lots of options.
I think I really learned this. I was at an event called Scott Export a couple of days before we recorded this episode. I've been to similar events like that. And what they've taught me is that two things have happened. One is that interpreters have been, certainly in a not necessarily mature market like most of the UK outside of London, interpreters have traditionally been scared to meet potential interpreting buyers on their turf. This was the first year that I went to Scott Export, and I wasn't the only language professional there. There were like two other translators and another interpreter there, and it was actually really heartening to see. But usually when I go to these events that are aimed at the people who would buy interpreting, I'm the only interpreter there, and that's kind of not healthy. The other thing is that there are businesses of all shapes and sizes who are going to look for interpreting at some point, and I know maybe in markets like Germany and Belgium and France, you could just be a conference interpreter who does conferences. Certainly in the UK, no one can make enough money just doing that. But if you're happy to be a conference interpreter who does conferences, business negotiations, helps clients out when they need, translation and interpreting and stuff, when you're happy to be that rounded person, there's a lot of businesses who really just want someone to take the weight off their shoulders and say, look, we want to get into the French market, what can you do for us? If you're ready to be the language person they can call on to arrange that, and you can get the skills to do it well, there's a market for you, because a lot of smaller businesses want someone that they're getting the same person every time, that they know they're not, in a giant call center somewhere. It's someone they can have a coffee with easily. That's actually a good selling point for us if we get it right.
Well, we always say as well that, and I'm pretty sure Renato mentioned that in the episode, people like to sell to people, in the end. And that can, be applied to different levels, either as an individual interpreter or someone working in a company. But in the end, it's all about, if you have a good relationship with someone, people like to sell to people. And if you can keep that relationship, like the classic question of, I don't know if how much this might apply to guys or not, but do you go to the same hairdresser every time?
I like to.
Yeah. And
possible.
What would make you switch hairdressers?
Someone suggested to me recently that I should switch barbers, and it was.
That's not a great
are you
start
still
to the
friends?
story. No. It's fine. The barber themselves did a good enough job. But when I don't know about the two Alexes, but when I've built up a relationship with someone, I mean, it's going to be 15 minutes to cut a guy's hair, if that. But when you've seen someone kind of every couple of months for going on 5-6 years, it feels strange to go somewhere else, especially with an atmosphere in the barbers can be so weird. I know some people want their hair cut and they don't want to say anything. I like to have a good chat. You'd never guess. But yeah, I came home and I said, that was fine, but next time I'm going back to my favorite one.
Yeah. But what was the point of that question, Sarah?
The point is that people like to go back to where they've had a good experience, and if they have a repeated good experience, then if you get one bad haircut, you might forgive that hairdresser. Whereas if you go to someone else, it was like, oh, they have a bad day. If you try someone new and they make a mistake, you might not come back. But when you have an established relationship, then you build that trust and you want to, continue to work with that person.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's true.
Well, this is when we play a jingle and we say, this episode was sponsored by Interpreter Tank. When you're so annoyed you want to blow something up. News story of the year. For me, there has to be a single nomination, and that was the suggestion that an interpreter working for a certain North American leader may have pulled a face at what she was asked to interpret. The story came out that was obviously garbage. It was just edited video and stuff. And two things are interesting about this story. One, interpreters got mentioned in the press, and it wasn't to do with us being too expensive, which is lovely. And two, the interpreting profession struggled to find good words to react to the story and to each other. I think that's a fair summary that I think most of us would agree on, that we were all struggling to work out how to say what we wanted to say in a way that was sayable. I think there's no doubt that's news story of the year, although there are other big stories as well. But I think for me, that says a lot about how we talk about interpreting to each other and to the wider world.
Yeah, but also purely from the standpoint of how viral it went, right? It was just, I thought when I saw it first, I was like, oh, okay, this is to me, when I'm going to be honest, when I saw it first, I thought it was funny, not because I thought that the interpreter was genuinely making this face and thinking those things, but I thought she's making the face that I'm making as I'm reading this. And so for me, it was like a nice illustration of like, oh yeah, that's the face that I'm making right now, even though she's just concentrating. But it was just more of an illustration. But I understand why it went so viral. I just didn't see it coming, to be honest. I was a little bit confused at first why it went so far and wide. But after spending a bit more time on it, I could see why.
Journalists like a scoop. I mean, two things came out of it with me. One, I think we need to work on. I liked the 1NT Hush initiative from Hugo Menendez. I think we need to be careful with social media and what we say in places like Twitter and Facebook, which basically are public. On the other hand, I realized yesterday almost, but also from that and from writing the book, I don't know if I mentioned that, that we need to work on interpreter PR. So I've started kind of a grassroots, deliberately rough and ready initiative, asking interpreters to find a way of sharing anonymized stories of the difference that they make. A job at a time is ideal if they can anonymize off the top of their heads off the back of a job. It may be that time-wise they don't want to do that. They want to, wait a couple of months so no one knows which job they're talking about. That's fine. But for us to share anonymized stories and say we make a difference, so that people hear the difference that interpreting actually make, rather than viral stories taken out of context, mashed about, we need to start taking responsibility for our own stuff. And so on the one hand, I've been asking interpreters to share anonymized stories of how they've made a difference at work. And on the other hand, I've been saying to interpreters it's a really good idea to get into the rooms that you would be in, Sarah, where potential buyers, big players, companies who would look for us would be, so that their impression of what an interpreter is based on a real interpreter rather than on a story of an interpreter that made the news.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I definitely agree on the side that I find it's really important that we all somehow work more on what you can call kind of client education. Yeah, to highlight the value of interpreting and what goes into interpreting, so that can, because let's be honest, like most people who aren't part of this particular industry have no idea what interpreters do exactly. They might think that we're translators at the very best, and then don't really know what translators are either. And what the difference is between a professional and just a bilingual person. And then especially at a time where more tools are coming out, which can be very useful, it's just, I do think that we have a lot more educating to do if we also want to uphold our rates and work standards, because we have seen this go horribly wrong already in a number of countries. And I mean, it seems to come back around a bit, to be honest, because these things don't last. They keep failing, but in between it's really bad for interpreters, and there's a certain negative trend happening at the moment again. So it's definitely worthwhile to try and put the word out more to people who aren't maybe directly involved in the industry at first.
So what do you mean by that negative trend, Sarah? I mean, there's like a chain of sort of negative events, or... No, that's an honest question. I'm not...
Okay. No, so from what I looked into recently, people have one of the main complaints I've been kind of getting from looking into different countries was that there was like a lack of interpreters. And there isn't actually a lack of interpreters, but it's either, but they're, in some countries, interpreters are essentially leaving the profession, and not so much in conference interpreting. This is more on the level of community public sector interpreting, medical, legal, all those areas.
That I get, yeah.
Yeah, mainly because of rates that are being dropped and certain working conditions. Lots of interpreters. In some countries, interpreters are being paid the same as cleaning staff. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with being cleaning staff, but you don't need to go through this extensive training, get your degree, or as community interpreters, they might travel to different appointments really far in certain countries, with vast distances, work at night, and people have like second jobs, and yeah, we mustn't be surprised then if maybe people run off to other professions where they get paid better and have less stress. But then through that as well, you lose a lot of people, good people as well.
Yeah.
And then you're left with more like volunteers, or there's still this trend of people just using their relatives or even children to interpret. It's like, oh yeah, just especially if no one's paying for it. That's another problem in some countries. There's no legal basis for it, and countries that would surprise you as well. And then kids are being used. And I mean, we talked about vicarious trauma before as well, and I mean, children are affected by that as well, of course. Let's imagine you have to tell your uncle he's been deported or whatever. There's lots of those challenges, and to me that's also, to be honest, verging on child labor, and it is not illegal in most European countries. So it's
that's a fair point. Yeah, there was Jonathan.
Yeah, I think that is a negative trend I've seen. I mean, there's all sorts of political reasons for that, and I think what's really struck me, someone asked me today, why don't you get a professional PR person to come in and, teach people to do it right? I think there's enough latent talent and enough latent kind of love for interpreting amongst interpreters that really, when you hear stories of, interpreters being paid the same as cleaning staff or interpreters having to leave the profession, no one else is going to tell that story as well as the person who's going through it. And no one else can tell the story of, what it's like to interpret in a medical appointment where you have to tell a family that they're going to lose a loved one, apart from an interpreter who's been there.
Mm.
And I think with these negative trends, and we all know about them, we all know about centralized outsourcing, we all know about people trying to use remote simultaneous when they really should have simultaneous interpreters there, using remote simultaneous to try and make interpreting cheaper by hiring interpreters in cheaper countries, and, it goes on and on. The counter to that isn't to stand up and scream or to say this isn't working and shout in people's face. The counter to that is to learn to tell a different story. And it's why, I'm not just being obsequious, but I've loved seeing Sarah's work, because you've taken topics that would normally get people either scared or not want to talk about, and you're beginning to tell us and the people who work with interpreters the story of, a different story, a different approach. And maybe this whole interpreter goes viral thing, to bring it back to the topic, this whole thing is a wake-up call to us that these trends are reversible. I loved what you said, Sarah, about, they just come back around. These trends are reversible, but they're reversible to the extent that we decide that we're going to control our own narratives from now on.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got people like Nimsy, we've got people like Slater, we've got people who know what they're doing, who can push stories out. And I'm sure, Sarah, if you or Florian saw a fantastic story about how an interpreter made a difference, you would be all over it like a rash. And that there's a multiplication effect when we see each other's stories and share them, that actually you can begin to drown out that stuff by sheer force of numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like the more I'm looking into it, you're coming from, I also come from the conference side, and I mean, I'm not saying that there are no challenges in conference interpreting, but in comparison to other types of interpreting, it seems like, we have it pretty good. There are so many, I think, crazier challenges, and not that you can't also get into extreme situations as a conference interpreter, I'm not saying that, but really in the community interpreting side, it's where it gets real, and where there's huge challenges as well. For example, if you look at and like you said, political development, of course, always influence interpreting or all language services, and especially with the refugee crisis and the huge influx of immigration, a lot of countries at the time, and even still, are struggling when there's suddenly like so many people coming. So the demand for interpreting goes up, like for community interpreting, for example. Yeah. And they might not have interpreters for those languages.
Exactly, the languages
and at least
are
not
the issue.
Yeah. Yeah, or not qualified interpreters. And in some cases, even if they want to certify them, there's sometimes not even a test available. So what do? You wait a year and don't do anything with those people? No, you can't. You have to provide some access to language. So this is then where it gets really messy.
Yeah.
There's a whole complexity here about, interpreters can't just defend their own turf. We have to be open to the situations that are there and actually turn it around from defending our own turf and saying, it's our way or the highway, to saying, yes, interpreters need to be treated properly. Yes, they need to be paid properly. But the way to encourage people to do that is to explain why it should matter to them. To explain why, we understand that you might need to pull in a whole ton of phone or remote interpreting with iffy technology for a time, but let's show you how you can build your own local capacity. It's fantastic that, machine interpreting exists or speech translation exists in some situations, but let's show you how you can integrate that into our workflow so that the stuff that matters is done by people who know how to do it right. And that's, for me, that's client education isn't telling the clients, you have to do it this way. Client education is, right, we understand what you're trying to achieve. We're going to work with you.
Here's how we can help.
Get you the results that you want. Yeah, here's how we can help. Here's how we can work with you. And that changes the game entirely. I think it's a new way of speaking that we've not always been good at doing. We like to slam down rule books. If we could stop that and turn it around to, well, let's learn from our mistakes. And instead of slamming a rule book, open up a microphone and say, let's hear what you have to say first. And we'll work on that basis.
Yeah, indeed. So it's going to be interesting to watch the situation in Denmark. I don't know if there are any further developments that we need to expect. I don't know. I think, Sarah, you've been looking into this a little bit.
Yeah, I've been following the debate, you could say, in Denmark, and it's still ongoing. But what has definitely already happened is, because this huge contract that was centralized and kind of changed the game in Denmark, it's caused a real stir, and hundreds of interpreters have protested and said they're not going to work with the new provider that has been chosen. And in turn, this has already led to court cases getting adjourned. And in one case, apparently even a shoplifter had to be let go by the police because no interpreter was available. So it's kind of crazy. To me, it shows kind of two things. On the one hand, how quickly this whole situation can change. Like one big decision by the government or by the provider, and it affects the interpreters. But it also shows how much the interpreters are, in the end, affecting like all these different scenarios. For example, like court cases. Same happened in the UK a few years ago, as we know, when a few thousand court cases had to be adjourned. And in the end, it's not exactly like they call it like a false economy as well, because it was intended as cost savings, but in the end cost a lot more because when all these court cases have to be redone, that costs a lot of money, of course. So I find it odd that for a while, I think things can work out and interpreters take a lot if they have to. But at some point it comes back around, and when you join forces, then because in the end it has to be livable, right? Interpreters have to be able to at least live off their wages, and in the end it's like this fine line trying to find the middle, where you can meet people's demands and have a living for yourself and protect your conditions. So it's finding that right balance, and client education is key to that, I think.
Right, absolutely.
So I guess, we'll keep an eye on how that situation develops. But it's not looking good, I think, at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing which was looking bad and seems to be getting better is we had those terrible cases of acoustic shock in Canada, and it's a horrible event, but what's come out of that is now, I think, a greater awareness amongst interpreters that we can't take this stuff for granted. And I know you were saying, Alex, I've seen it as well, colleagues buying more and more kind of sound limiter devices. I think that's great to see.
I actually got in touch with my equipment provider because I was in contact on Twitter with a colleague of ours and just kind of was inquiring how all of that stuff worked, because that was really interesting to me. And then he was saying that basically just reduces the overall volume of your interpreting input, which logically also increases the peaks you have, because if everything is lower, the peaks will be lower too.
Mm-hmm.
So in that context, I was thinking, well, then kind of what's the point? Why don't I just turn down the volume? Because I was wondering, like, so why would I buy this? And I do want to buy this. I do want a limiter. I want like a tiny limiter which prevents any of the peaks of happening.
Yeah.
And just plug it into my thingamajig. My interpreting thingamajig.
Yeah, the thingamajig. Exactly. Do you want to speak to this, Jonathan, as
one.
the resident audio sound guy?
I think both of us are resident audio people. I think there should be limiters that literally just cut off peaks, because the problem is that if you have a device that just reduces volume, then all the interpreter's going to do is they're going to turn their volume back up.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the problem that you described, Alex. And we probably have to say what a peak is. So usually, of course, you can sort of adjust your volume and adjust how loudly you want to hear the speaker. But then you have things like people tapping on the mic, feedback when the headphones come too close to the mic, and then you get loud noises, which is basically what we mean when we say a peak.
If the sound's set up well, then it should be difficult to do that unless someone does something daft like screaming down the mic. But there should be ways on most sound setups, certainly like modern sound equipment, should be able to take out some of that. Some of it's harder to take out, like what people call feedback. That's harder, but they're from what I understood, that these devices were there to basically spot peaks in the signal and just cut them. So that's what they should be doing. The ones that just turn it down shouldn't be used.
And some of the tech is also built into some of the consoles, as far as I understand. So some of the consoles have a limiter and even a little light that indicates if there's a peak, which gets cut down. So.
And a lot of the tech guys actually have, if it's not already built into your equipment, a lot of the guys will actually have it in their own consoles. A lot of the tech guys will have it in their own consoles, so they will basically pre-filter your incoming sound. But what I was really curious, and if you have anything like this, please comment at hello@troubleterps.com. I really want that thing that our friend had on Twitter, which is basically just like this little tiny thing which you plug into the aux input on the console side, where basically your headphone would go in usually, and then you plug it into your headphones, and then that little teeny tiny thing, it's not, I mean, according to the pictures, it's not much bigger than, I don't know, a box of matches.
Yeah, it looks like a little MP3 player, basically.
It kind of looks like a tiny MP3 player. Like, that thing would prevent that, in theory. I Googled for half a day. I couldn't really find anything, but then I might have also been quite distracted, so maybe I didn't look for the right thing.
Were you actually interpreting at the same
down the right
time?
avenues?
Yeah.
I might have been interpreting at the same time. Who knows?
Who knows?
Who is to say? Who knows?
The sound providers that I work with, who I'm not going to mention because they're great, but we don't take paid advertisements yet. The sound providers I work with, in his words, he said the best sound in the room should be in the interpreter's ears.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So get people who know what they're doing, and that stuff should be pre-filtered for you if they know what they're doing.
But I mean, sometimes you don't really have any control about the sound guy or the sound girl and how they're setting up the system. So some colleagues have been sort of resorting to buying these smaller devices. And as far as I can tell, there are basically two different companies or two different kinds of outfits that offer these things. So there is, hang on, I wrote this down here. So there's Limit Ear and Adapt Ear. And Limit Ear, they actually have sort of different kinds of devices. Some are a bit smaller, others are a little bit bigger. And some of them sort of will analyze the audio that they process during the day and sort of will make sure that you don't have too much exposure in terms of overall volume and just the amount of sound that gets to your ear, I guess. And Adapt Ear, I think they just have one product. And I think they also have to be sort of adapted to the kind of headphones that you use. So it's still a little bit early days for this. It's not really a product that you just buy and use. There's a little bit of preparation involved as far as I can tell. But it seems to be something that might be a good investment, especially if you are an interpreter working with different kind of tech companies and maybe with less control of the whole sound and everything. So maybe that's something that we will get back to. I mean, we'll put a few links in the show notes about the whole incident the incidents that we had in Canada with our colleagues from the Translation Bureau. And we'll put in a link about the follow-up that AIC have done about this. It's definitely something that we're going to watch next year.
Absolutely. This could be really, really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is going to run, and it's something that we need to keep our eyes on. I think that's going to be a bigger thing, and perhaps there's a hidden danger that we haven't come across. Talking about hidden dangers, Sarah, you were really big on a story coming out of California about the hiring and the kind of contracts that interpreters are on there.
Well, I personally haven't written about it, but it's a hot topic in the interpreting industry at the moment because it's somewhat of a game changer, and it's really ruffled a lot of feathers. That the classification of like the change in the like gig economy law in California, basically, and that interpreters and translators as well want to be exempt from this law. Because while the law technically is great for the protection of people working in the gig economy, except that we are not people who work in the gig economy, and that that most of us work as freelancers or we're our own entrepreneurs, and that this would actually this would cause a problem. Or will cause a problem for both sides, the individual interpreters as well as the LSPs working with interpreters. Because it will just change the whole game of the business for everyone. So I think they're still seeking a change to the law, but at the moment, I think it only just got approved, and the exemption was rejected, even though some other industries were exempt, like hairdressers, for example.
Yeah, I think the initial idea was to help out the drivers that drive for Uber and Lyft and these kind of ride-hailing companies, which I think is a noble goal in and of itself. But it's
Exactly.
I haven't looked at it too much, and we should probably do an episode about that next year. But it looks like they went a little bit too far with the whole project. There are some exemptions for some professions, but it's apparently a really difficult issue for freelance interpreters, also for truck drivers who are often independent contractors. So it seems to have a lot of side effects, and so I think it was passed by the whatever they call it. I don't even know. It's the legislature, and
American people.
Yeah, it was signed into law by the governor, so it's definitely coming into force apparently. But the question is if anything can be sort of saved or salvaged from this. Yeah.
Well, it does come back to, and I hate to say it, comes back to the question of interpreting PR, that if people don't understand the nature of our job, they're not going to legislate for it very well. And so this is why whenever people say, we should get legal protection of status for interpreters, I say, well, there are a number of stages first before we can even think about that. And if this law is anything to go by, perhaps we should kind of come back to square one and say we should help people understand what it is we do. Then we can talk about the other stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It for me also comes back around to sort of, client education, or just in general getting the word out a bit more to people who aren't part of this industry. Because it sounds like the law was well intended for people who genuinely work in the gig economy, but it doesn't work out well in our industry. For anyone. So.
But then also I think for like legislators, the lines might be very difficult to distinguish. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
I think it's not an easy call to make between a freelancer who works on a conference-to-conference base and then an Uber driver who works on a drive-to-drive base. I don't think, legislatively speaking, that's necessarily the most easiest thing to distinguish. So I do agree that it's like a very difficult thing to get right, but I do think I wouldn't want to be in their shoes trying to legislate this. Do you know what I mean?
That's a fair point. Yeah, but the one article in one article I read several today. One article mentioned that basically, if you look at the exemptions that they got across for this bill, is that the exemptions were all approved for industries that have a very strong lobby, and interpreting just doesn't have that.
Right.
So
well, that's not.
it's basically tough luck.
So that's not great.
Yeah.
No, well, but then that's just. I mean, if your law depends on strong external lobbies to be a good comprehensive law, it's a bad law.
Welcome to politics.
Yeah, that's politics.
Well, yeah. And also, it's America, so nobody's employed there, so we can say this.
Well, lots of our colleagues are employed there, so, but also...
Well, nobody on the podcast,
True,
immediately right here, so...
No, but also the thing is, for now it's affecting California, but it's potentially going to go onto other states as well, so this could become an even bigger issue.
Right.
So ideally, it's time to nip it in the bud immediately.
I was also thinking about, and we wanted to say something, we like doing our years in review, but we also like to think about what's next. For me, what's next is actually...
Let's get out the crystal ball.
Well, also, one of the big topics that's coming up, which Sarah and I agree on, I have a book out called Interpreters versus Machines.
No way.
Available in all good bookstores by December 22nd.
A book?
Just in time for Christmas.
Just in time for Christmas. Can I just say this to people, okay? The best way to get the book, there will be a Routledge link in the show notes, but if you can pre-order the book from your local, physical bookshop, they'll pre-order it with the ISBN number fine. It's good for your local bookshop because it keeps them going. It's good for interpreting because they might start stocking interpreting books on their bookshelves, and it's good for the author as well because when your book is seen physically, more people buy it. Also, pre-orders count a whole lot more than orders after the time for charts and stuff. So but all this to say that I think machine interpreting...
Don't support Amazon. I didn't say anything.
I get the same anyway. No, I get the same money anyway. But pre-orders are what charts are counted, what count for charts. But all this to say that one of the big topics coming up, and I think Sarah and I both agree on this, is machine interpreting, which is really speech translation. We might get onto Translatotron later. It's a thing. It exists. And I liked Sarah's point at Geneva about remote interpreting, which applies here. For the sake of language access, it's probably necessary, but it does pose some real issues for professional interpreters that I think we need to start facing properly, which is why I wrote the book.
Well, I think it's also important to make a distinction again between, remote interpreting and machine interpreting that are not the same thing. Both, I think,
Definitely
will be or are already topics that have been
conflate the two.
Yeah, both I think are relevant and really important topics at the moment because they are both coming. They're actually already here on some level, remote more so than machine interpreting. But yeah, they're not the same thing. So for remote still involves people, whereas machine interpreting doesn't. But I do like in my opinion, none of this will replace the traditional interpreting, or that the machines won't replace interpreters. But both types can be used to really like expand the interpreting market and reach really remote locations. Like we might sometimes forget about, what the situations are like in other countries as well. In some countries, you have really, really remote villages, and you just don't have the on-site interpreters there. Or you might have 3 interpreters for this one specific language requirement in the entire country. Or they're flying people in from completely like crazy far away places. And so why not? If, remote interpreting doesn't need to be unprofessional. It can be done really well. It doesn't, like, it's not always done well,
Totally,
but it can be done well. So I think there's also that level, that needs to be discussed. And yeah, machine interpreting it's like, for example, huge in Asia, no surprise. China and Japan, Japan especially, like they have these little handheld devices that are booming there right now. And because Japan is a largely monolingual country, and so like everyday people use it in shops and taxis and stuff like that now to communicate with tourists, for example. And those people wouldn't be able to afford interpreters, if we're just being honest. So it can be useful to just bridge that gap for those everyday kind of super basic communication. And I don't think that is a threat to interpreters at all, because we're not going to be there in other cases anyway.
I think that the biggest development for me, and I'm still waiting for them to publish independent data on it, is the Google Translatotron. I didn't get to write about it in the book because it came out too late. There will be videos alongside the books where I do talk about it, but basically their idea is to skip the usual step in speech translation where you turn someone's words into text and then you machine translate them and then you turn the text back into words. The idea of Translatotron is that you completely change it and you just go from sound to sound without any intermediate step of turning it into text. They've done it because they think that they can, by doing that, they can relay someone's tone of voice and vocal patterns in another language. The problem with that is that anyone who's interpreted between, say, English and French knows that tone of voice doesn't mean the same in English as it does in French. Exactly. What we use intonation for in English and French, you use sentence structure for. So it really shows that they're not thinking like linguists. They're just thinking, how can we make you sound the same in other languages, which you shouldn't do anyway. But that says something to us about their awareness of what language is and what we do.
Right, but then on the flip side, I was just talking to a colleague who bought the Google Pixel 4 with the new recorder app, and he was actually saying that no matter the speaker, no matter the presentation, he was able to record speech to text with a 98% accuracy, no matter how slurred or how quick or how unclear the speaker was. And if this is what you just can do on a regular phone, and then this is just speech to text, you can then do text to speech. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate. It just has to be fine.
Yeah.
Neither are we, to be honest.
Yeah, that's the other point. But
yeah, we don't have to be perfect. We just have to be different, right? So
yes,
we have a different quality threshold.
Yes.
I think, I don't know, Sarah, what you were going to say. Sorry.
No, but humans aren't perfect either, but humans still have a genuine cognitive understanding of what's going on. And we have the, aspects that machines can't. We have certain elements that machines will not be able to do in the near future anyway. Something, right. Where it comes to our human values. But exactly. Again, I don't think, to me, it doesn't need to be human versus machines. It's just more of an extension, like you already said, like it doesn't need to be a threat. There can be other use cases.
At the moment, it's all pitched in that either or situation, right? Like at the moment, it's either Google is going to replace you or it's not. Well, like it's not anything in the sense that, like, I mean, like I would love to get to that point where we can get support from Google or support from. Well, let's be honest. It's probably gonna be Google. Let's.
Well, that's another use case again. Some people are more like predicting this kind of scenario and I think that is super realistic and almost there already, that you just as an interpreter will be working more with machines as well, so that you, for example, get those transcripts along as you're interpreting, and you can look at them if you want, to have that assistance, stuff like that. But I also think it's time, with all of those trends, there might be people. Everyone has been shouting for centuries that the machines will replace humans, on not just in interpreting, and all sorts of industries. But it's kind of up to us to maybe not panic and give into the hype, but more to educate ourselves and see, what it is actually all about, or how can it be used, because it is making significant strides, but that doesn't need to mean that we're going to be replaced.
Right.
I feel like someone's been reading the chapter abstracts that I sent to my publisher. No, but
wait,
writing a book? Where I would say that we have to be careful, and this again comes back to PR. I think we're going to do a PR episode in 2020. Is that there was a case recently with Google Translate being used to vet refugees. And where the danger lies is where the claims of these companies, many of them either hyperinflated or using test metrics that aren't relevant, when their claims are swallowed whole by people who are already under price and time pressure, who make decisions that could affect people's lives, then as an industry we do have a problem. I absolutely agree we need to be working with them. We shouldn't be seeing it as a fight. In fact, that's one of the conclusions that I come to in the book. Spoiler alert. But I think where there is a fight and where it is human versus machine, and where we do need to be a bit stronger, is we need to be explaining that it's not fair to use unsuitable tools in a situation where the use of those tools could rob people of freedom or life.
Absolutely.
And that's where we need to look at, how do we pitch interpreting better? How do we sell interpreting better, so that the natural position of clients is to come to humans rather than risking a machine. And that's a challenge for us, not for them.
Well, I think anything high stakes like that in the hospital, in courts, or immigration, all that kind of stuff, if you're if someone in politics makes a decision to use a machine for that, then that is highly irresponsible. So I think that even goes to a completely different level. For the moment, machine interpreting is making significant strides, but as I said, for basic stuff. Yeah, we're talking about maybe the cab driver, the shopkeeper, or maybe there's other use cases as well where it can be a little bit higher. But I wouldn't use this in the hospital or in the court where people's lives are hanging in the balance. That's just irresponsible. And I think we're far away from that, because I can't see that being legal anytime soon.
What's legal and what's done are sadly two different things at times.
Well, that's true. Yes.
So moving on. What is next for Troublesome Terps in 2020? We have a lot of episode ideas lined up.
First episode is already at least recorded. It's not produced yet, but it's already recorded. So we have January covered. And after January, we have a lot of good ideas, and we'll have to decide on what we're going to get to first. And but we're certainly not running out of ideas and possible guests and things like that. So.
And even if we are, just let us know at hello@troublesome.com.
Like and subscribe.
But one thing that I do think is amazing, and is maybe a good way to close the show, is a tribute to Sarah for coming onto the show and becoming our fourth host. That's fantastic. A tribute to the audience for continually listening. But also, I would say a tribute to the richness of interpreting itself, that when we started this, I'm sure we've said this before, when we started this, we didn't know how long it would run for. I think the two Alexes and I thought maybe we'd get, 6 months, a year?
Speak for yourself.
No, but we thought the ideas would probably dry up. We didn't realise there was enough of the amount of ideas was so great that, we're now into our fourth year. And we still there's still stuff that we haven't even touched. And true. I think that's a tribute to the richness of interpreting, that, everyone starts a project and thinks, at what point am I going to run out of ideas? And actually, I think we're nowhere near that. And now we've got a whole new fount of ideas to come in as well. I think we could be We could do an episode every week and still not run out of ideas.
God,
no,
no.
we're going to do that. No, we're going to do that.
That's not.
Not going to happen.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah,
That's
I
a nice
agree. Like
wrap-up, yeah.
the more you look into it, the more you realize how much you haven't seen yet or talked about yet.
And I think I'd also encourage our lovely listeners to just make themselves heard a little bit more, and say what you want to hear, what you liked about the show, what you didn't like about the show. Because we're doing this for us. Yeah, that's one part of it, but we're also doing it for you. So could be more of a two-way street, if that's a word. Yeah.
Collaborative approach.
So do get in touch on Twitter or hello@troubleterms.com.
This will be the last thing I say.
I dare you.
I wonder.
I'm really pleased at how well the podcast has been received, and I'm amazed at how it's exceeded everything that I expected of it.
I think we can all agree to that.
Yeah.
Amen.
I don't think that's a controversial statement.
That's not controversial at all.
To make.
Anyway, I have dishes to do.
I have some sleeping to do. Oh, guys, I'm really tired.
Yeah, it's quite late. But anyone's, I think you're speaking for all of us. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, Alex, go
So
ahead.
much politeness.
I was just
No,
going to
you
say.
go ahead.
Just wanted to know if